So first of all, I want to thank Creative Mornings and James and all the volunteers here today, really, and for you guys to coming out in the morning, so early in the morning. So I appreciate that. So let's get started. I wanted to start with this metaphor of the lotus flower. It's just such a beautiful flower that rises above the murky waters. And we'll talk more about what that means for me. So I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, in South America. And at a very young age, actually at this age, I started to travel. So a little bit of a traveling background for me. Before I was 7, I had gone to Peru, Brazil, and Argentina. So I started to understand people, the connection. You know, I learned how to say thank you in all the languages. Also, at a very young age, we moved to San Diego. And so I had to learn English very quickly to make any sort of friends. Then we moved back to Venezuela, but we moved from Caracas to Cumaná. Then we moved to Macomb, Illinois, in the middle of nowhere in Illinois. And then I ended up my last few teenage years in Mérida, Venezuela. So in the mountains, in the Andes Mountains. It's very different than Mérida, Mexico, I will say. Different temperatures. Just in case some people are mixed up in the temperatures. It's very cold and it's mountainous and it's a beautiful part of the country. So that kind of started my love for travel. So then I said, hey, what if I become a flight attendant? And my dad's like, no, you can't become a flight attendant. And I was like, I didn't understand, you know, what he meant about that. But I think he truly understood my creative side and knew that, you know, I could be something different than a flight attendant. So I became an industrial designer. For those of you who don't know what industrial design is, it's actually the intersection between engineering and art. At least that's what I say. It's kind of like where they come together right in the middle. And the way that I explain it is if you have a car, the industrial designer designs everything that you see on the outside and the inside, the ergonomics, you know, how you reach for the different buttons. And the engineer decides the inside. So it's a really important partnership between the engineer and the industrial designer to make a beautiful product. So for me, beauty is primary. I have to buy something that looks pretty and then it functions. So this is my favorite chair by Arne Jacobsen. And we had to, in industrial design, we had to learn every single chair. So, but this is my favorite one. I love the curves, and actually it comes in different colors, but I love the red one. The red one is the iconic chair. So, so guess what? You can become an industrial designer and still travel the world. So I worked at Procter & Gamble for 13 years, and I got to travel the world and not just like get to see the world, but I got to also talk to people and understand cultures and show them the products that I had designed and get feedback and some understanding, because not everybody thinks the same way, right? We know that. We're a diverse group. And so understanding where they were coming from a cultural standpoint, was really important to me. I started my career doing front-end innovation, looking at the future vision, and then went to really doing current business, so brand identity. And it was really interesting, even inside Procter & Gamble. I say that I got a PhD in branding in Procter & Gamble because I got to do a lot of different things and talk to a lot of different people and work with multi-faceted teams. And so that was an experience for me that I will never forget. So I'm going to talk to you about how to invest in the stock market. What do you think? And no, that is not my area of expertise. So I'm really going to talk to you about the 7 ways to invest in yourself coming from me, Yamilca. which will be an interesting journey. So the first one is deliver on your passion, right? So how did I do that? I love fashion. I became an industrial designer, but I also love fashion. I learned how to sew at a very young age. I used to make all my own outfits until people wanted me to make their outfits. And I was like, no. I stopped sewing because everybody, can you fix my zipper? Then I said, I don't know how to sew. I forgot how to sew. So, but I love fashion and I love what it represented. And I was able to take my projects to this fashion status. And that really like made me so excited and happy. You know, and the thing about, remember we talked about the murky waters? It's an understanding when you're in the dark and being able to go to the light and being able to take things to where your passion is. The second one is work on what I love. Yes, not always corporate is the funnest job to have. It's very stressful. But a lot of times I put goals for myself, right? What else can I do beyond work? So I took out some furniture and designed some furniture, or I did a lot of certifications because I love to learn. I am a yoga certified teacher. I'm an Enneagram certified life coach. I also did Ayurveda and understood the health and wellness part of Ayurveda. And I studied at the Deepak Chopra school, if any of you know Deepak Chopra. So that was really interesting to me, and also understanding not only myself, but also how I can help others in that space. The third one is challenging myself. For some reason, I really like to do this. And when somebody tells me I can't do something, oh, that's not a good idea. I will do it. I will make it happen. And it was interesting. A colleague at Procter & Gamble would say to me, if you don't feel uncomfortable, you're not growing. You're not challenging yourself. So feeling uncomfortable is part of life. And again, when you go into the murky waters, you kind of, if you're aware of it, you can get yourself back to the light. And for me, it was really going deep into understanding the consumer I was going for. This is a project that I did, and really going deep in understanding what drives them, having empathy for them. You know, a lot of times we have the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys, and we're always like, oh, they don't understand this. Why do they do this? And they're different, right? They grew up in a different time. So really trying to put yourself in their place and understand what drives them, what fulfills them, was really important to me. And being able to kind of take that back onto my projects. And not just my projects, but also my personal life. And because my husband used to always complain sometimes about the younger people, and I would say, well, remember, they value this versus we value that. And it really helped me understand and have empathy for others. The fourth one, surrender to the process. So a lot of times, I'm a designer at heart, right? And a lot of times, you know, you're at work and they want you to do this process and follow the process. And a lot of times I would fight it. Again, being in the dark and fighting it, fighting the process. But when you surrender to it, when you say, hey, let me see how I can apply this to my space. So surrendering to that process and applying my design principles to the overall engineering process, and this was an innovation process, really helped me kind of, again, empathize with that team and be able to show them in their viewpoint how I was going to work the process, how we were going to follow these specific rules around design and what was important to do from a design standpoint. The fifth one, my chapter after corporate. So yes, I did leave corporate. And so this is my Cinderella story, okay? So I was lost in this corporate world. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, what I wanted to continue. I left the city that I lived in for 20 years and moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And yes, the Derby. If you don't know about Louisville, Kentucky, we have bourbon and Derby. And so I left, I married my sweetheart, and I felt lost. But remember I told you I did yoga and I learned about the deities and Ganesha. And Ganesha is a remover of obstacles. And everybody should have a fairy godmother. Ganesha was my fairy godmother. And that really let me release and be able to do the things that I loved. You know, I started kind of this fashion space, and I was able to kind of magically build these tools with connecting with different people and different communities. And I ran with it, kind of took off. And I felt like I had a certain amount of time that I really needed to launch this. And it all kind of fit. When things start to work for you in this entrepreneur world that is a little different than corporate, you kind of start to see kind of how things start to fit and make sense. And then I was a happy queen. But really, it helped me unlock my brand essence, like what I was really about, and able to really live this life and invest in myself. So number 6, live by my values. You know, a lot of times we're asked, like, what are your values? What do you value? And I was fortunate to meet a business partner, and we designed these archetype cards. And they're based on psychology. And I really connected with these cards. So I felt like these 2 cards were really what we call our brand values, or my brand values. So I felt like I was adaptive because of all the travel I did. I was really able to adapt to different cities. I felt insightful because I really took in that insight from the different countries. Persuasive, sometimes I get a little persuasive. And dynamic, I love, doing different things. I love dancing. I'm not great at it, but I love it. And magnetic. And then I had this side of being really passionate. I'm Latina at the end of the day, so passion is just in my blood. Really indulgent. I love indulging in especially chocolate. And then this instinctual nature, this emotional, yes, I cry a lot. My mother said, I hope you have, children, and you'll see how much they cry every day, because you cried all the time. And then compassionate. That kind of brings out this compassionate side of you. So I'll tell you what these cards are. This one's the Magician card, the Visionary, and then also the Lover card, which is more of the indulgent and compassionate side. And the 7th one and the last one is live by design, or live by my design. A lot of times we tend to live by other people's design, or we have this identity. I felt like when I went from corporate to entrepreneur, I lost my identity. Like I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who I wanted to become. But then I took all the things that I love to do. And like James mentioned, I was in Bali last week or the week before that, and I got to run my own workshop, and really bringing people in to understand their brand archetype. And this was just a fun photo shoot we got to do on the beach. So really trying to live your own life and what that means for you. So I'm going to leave you with the 7 ways to invest in yourself is by deliver on your passion, work on what you love, try to see how that fits into your life. Challenge yourself. Like, how do you do something different that you've never done before, but that you always wanted to do? Surrender to the process, surrender to somebody else's process. And that really will help you see things from their point of view. Your story by chapters, right? We have different chapters in our life, and it's about releasing that identity of that chapter and coming into the new chapter of your life. And then live by your values. Really understand what your values are. And then always look at that when you have a difficult time deciding something. Is like, does this really fit with my values and what I want to do? And then live by design. And I don't mean live by somebody else's design, but live by your design, what you want to create for yourself. And we end with this beautiful lotus flower, and I'm going to read to you the verse of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, "One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering to the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus is untouched by water." Bhagavad Gita 5.10. So this might mean something very different to you than it does to me, but that's okay, because we each have our own interpretation of what things mean. And if you want to know more, this is the archetype method and what I'm doing now. But I will leave you with this amazing place of, Creative Morning.
Do we have any questions, comments, queries, something that comes to mind? Because I have a question, so I'm going to kick off. And my question is, so how do I start?
Yes.
Where you meet me, Creative Mornings, university professor, podcaster. How do I start taking control?
Yes. So again, I always go back to, that's a great question, because I didn't know where to start, especially when I went on to entrepreneurship. I tried all these things. I went to these classes, but really being aware of like where your darkness or your shadow side is and how you come up, what makes you really excited, like when you come out of that shadow. I think that's a really good way to start, is like, what is it that you love, love, love to do? And how do you make that into a business? You know, how do you make that? And you know, business is not easy, I have to say. I mean, I've been trying to be an entrepreneur for 5 years now, 5 years. And it's always, I learn new things, I try new things, I throw this away, I start with this. And over time, you start to see what works and what doesn't work. Because it's not just also, I think also having that empathy for people and really being open to feedback. I have to say, like, this presentation was with a lot of feedback from different people, and really taking on that feedback and being able to then put your piece into it and going back and forth with it. So it's not going to happen overnight, but I think for me it happened over time, but really taking in those learnings and seeing what really, really made me happy.
I have 2 questions. Well, one's a question, one's a request. One, what do you mean by shadow side? And 2, can I see the QR code again?
Yeah. Yes, I will get that.
So what I mean by the shadow side is sometimes we get into this dark place, like we feel like things are happening to us, and we feel unhappy, and we can't see the light on the end of the tunnel. That's what I call the shadow side. So that unhappiness, that place where you don't feel like things are working out for you. And so trying to see what really makes you happy, that contrast is where I talk. And then was there a second part to that? Oh, okay. Yes?
Yeah, thanks. That's really great. A great way to start the morning. Thank you. Really.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's fascinating that I love that you've got this strong kind of spiritual quality of influence in the work and your journey. So yeah, I wanted to share a little bit more about that. Like like you get some quotes there and therefore, yeah, like.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. I think it all started when I was in corporate. Not everything is, happy and flowers. And so really I had to learn about myself, about what made me happy, what made me sad. And so that's where I kind of started seeking and looking for these things. And I started with yoga, actually. And yoga is not just the exercise of yoga, but if you really go deep into yoga, there's a lot of teachings and learnings. And I started to read a lot of books. And then I started to understand how these metaphors and this spirituality of what that meant kind of played a role in my life. And then I studied the Enneagram, which was another look deep into like all the bad things that you do and how you can't control other people, but you can take responsibility and be happy with who you are. And so those things over time really kind of, and I took on meditation. It really helped me kind of relax in this crazy world, because we're bombarded and, Instagram and, Facebook and all this craziness and all this stuff. And we're bombarded with this every day. And really to settle into myself, I had to look inside myself. And meditation really helped me a lot with that. And I think, back to your question, how does that come up? I think when you start to relax into yourself, you can see things that maybe you wouldn't have seen before, or thought of before. And I think that really, that spiritual piece was important to me to kind of fulfill this other side, because we always have these two sides. And we talk about the dark and the light. We have this kind of corporate, crazy life, stress life, and then we have the spiritual side, meditation, and how to make those two kind of live together and use them to your advantage. Yes.
One of the things you talk about is emotion and how emotion fits through all these 7 pieces. How do you talk to people about giving themselves permission to show, feel, exhibit, show that vulnerability of having an emotional side?
Yeah, that is really key. And for me, like, I'm an emotional person, it's just I was born that way, right? So I know what it is to be emotional. And actually in the corporate world, I was asked to kind of tone it down a little bit. Like, if you need to be emotional, can you go into that room and kind of close the door? And so there was a time where I kind of stopped being emotional and kind of like just kept it all in. That was not a good time. I was really in the shadows at that time. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be who I am. And then I didn't really, it's not that I didn't care what people thought. You always care what people think. But I was able to express myself a little bit more. All this yoga stuff and all this stuff kind of let me kind of express who I was and be able to kind of talk to people. And then they took me for who they were, okay with who I was. They were like, oh, we like her. She's different. and she has these really interesting ideas. So being comfortable and being able to kind of just show that other side of you, not just, I'm the smart corporate person, also show that vulnerable side, being able to connect with people at a deeper level. I had gone through so much in my life. I felt, I mean, I had a wonderful life, but I felt like, oh, my parents want to, I only spend a year here and then I have to leave all my friends and make new friends. But now I appreciate that because I was able to adapt. I'm able to now adapt into different groups. And actually where I live now, I have different groups where I connect. I have my Latin group, I have my yoga group, I have my fashion group, and I have my business group, right? So sometimes it's difficult for them to come together, but I know how to kind of, find my way through that. And so it's a little opposite of what you asked, but I hope that kind of answered the question.
First of all, thank you for sharing. And you talk about this dark period and search for your path. I understand that you've tried different things and you failed. What made you get up and try again? And what was your support mechanism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there were many times, even in corporate, where I felt people would, kind of say no, or you can't do that, or you're not good enough, right? And there was a time where I spent way too much time in the dark side. Like it was over, and I was getting very shut down. And I think friends support and kind of me being able to also see that, and because of that search, and not letting that happen anymore, And so if somebody would say, well, you can't, like, I wanted to create this fashion community, and people were like, well, you can't do that. You can't do a fashion show. And I was like, what? I would be like, let me show you. I wouldn't even say anything. I would just do the work hard. And I did a fashion show that people would say, oh, I feel like I'm in New York. Because I wanted to show off that everything is possible. And for me, I think it's something like, I can't, I don't say like, oh, that's not possible. I just say, I just stay quiet and then do my thing. And then I actually do it. And people are like, whoa, that's crazy. You said you were going to do it and then you did it. And I think a lot of us sometimes don't take that action to fulfill. Like we do something, it gets hard, and we're like, oh, it's too hard. But for me, it's like it's a challenge. Like I have to show, even if it takes me 3 years. I have to show that it's possible, that things can happen. And maybe it's the design part of me or the creative part of me that always wants to show people that things can happen, not exactly the way that you maybe think, but there's some way that it becomes that.
Hey.
Hi.
I like the point that you made about chapters of our life, like our identities in chapters and leaving those behind. But I was hoping maybe you can expand a bit about that journey of discovering our unmet needs. And then I think in the presentation you mentioned it was through your work to empathize with your customer. But how was that for you as your journey?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's funny because sometimes we learn things in the opposite way. So I learned to first empathize with people, like not with myself, but with people. And that was because I wanted to I wanted to make the best product. And to make the best product, you need feedback, and you need to understand kind of what drives people. And so it really, like that, not just understand, oh, I like this button. That wasn't enough for me. Like I wanted to understand who they were. And so I did all these archetype and persona. I think you cannot have a strategy unless you understand your customer. And your customer will give you the strategy, if that makes sense. So a lot of times we design these things, but we don't understand our customer. And we're wondering like, why isn't this selling? Why am I not doing well? And it's because we haven't put the strategy together with our customer in mind, with that deep understanding of what drives them, not what they like. Who cares what they like? It's more like, what emotional things do they have? What do they love? And then tying that emotion to that element, right? So for me, I love that chair. I can't tell you exactly why I love it, but they understood that emotion, that connection to the color, those curves, the ergonomic piece that people were going to be attracted to. They knew who their customer was. Apple knows who their customer is. They're always designing these amazing products. But sometimes when we don't know that customer, and then that made me realize like, I'm a customer too. Like there's certain products that I'm attracted to that other people aren't attracted to. So I started to try to understand that from my point of view as well. Like, oh, like they like this, but I don't like this. I like this. And it helped me kind of see that connection and that not just there's some similarities and there were some differences that kind of helped me understand who I was. Because sometimes at P&G we were like, it was like, you are not the customer. You are you. And we would separate ourselves from the customer. And I think sometimes you are the customer and you can see things that other people wouldn't see. So being able to kind of look at those two sides was really helpful for me. And that's what really drove me and drove the strategy that I followed. I hope that answers your question.